Hello, friends. This is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series where I chit-chat with other writers. If you are a new subscriber, and there are some new subscribers as far as I can tell, or a new listener, this is a totally unscripted podcast. I bring on authors of varying backgrounds and who write varying different things, and we just wing it. I know who they are. I know what they've written. Obviously, I've researched them, but I have no questions written down. It's just a conversation, as if I were just meeting them at a cocktail party, and a lot of shop talk. So if you're an aspiring writer and looking for advice, and you can get that advice through hearing about different writers' journeys, then this is definitely a show you're going to want to listen to, because it's a little bit long form. Each interview is about 35, 40 minutes, and it goes in throughout the writer's journey. So we don't really focus on any of their works. We might reference them. Of course, I'm going to tell you about their latest books before we get to the conversation. But really, it's about understanding how did they get to where they are now, and what have they learned? What are the things that influenced them? All that good stuff. So today, before I get to today's guest, just a couple quick things about me. My new book, Tell Me What You Did, is now out. There's some exciting things happening with it. I still feel weird that even though I know this will be released after those things are announced, I still feel weird about saying things right now about them. But you can check out that book in any bookstore and online, of course. And if you are a writer and you are looking for coaching, if you are looking for online classes or retreats, I do all of those things. I have a company called Unbound Writer. You can go to unboundwriter.com and check all that stuff out. And finally, I'm traveling quite a bit with my new book, Tell Me What You Did. So if you're interested in seeing if I'm going to be in your area, you can just go to carterwilson.com and go to my events page and see the list there. All right. All of that being said, let's get to today's guest. Today, I talked to the wonderfully talented Charlotte Vassell. So Charlotte is a writer, obviously. She lives in the UK, just outside of London, and she has two books out. Her first debut, her debut was The Other Half. It was the Detective Inspector Caius Beauchamp, book number 1. And she followed it up with The In Crowd, which is her latest book and the second in the series. And today, I'm recording this on the 22nd of January. I got an email from the Mystery Writers of America announcing the Edgar Award nominees, and I saw Charlotte's name there. Charlotte, with The In Crowd, is up for Best Novel. So that's a big fucking deal. It's really exciting. So I had the pleasure of being able to talk to her on the day that she received word that her book had been nominated. And she's got an interesting background, and we go through it in depth in the podcast, but she always wanted to be an actor. And she finally quit that dream. And we talked a lot about quitting and her need to storytell, her bursts of creativity manifested themselves in the pandemic into writing. And it was in the pandemic that she wrote her first book, The Other Half. So it was just a very interesting kind of journey for her. And we talked about getting an agent and what kind of jobs was she working or still continues to work as she writes, and how did those jobs inform her observations of people. And she talks specifically about the best job she ever had, working in the Hattery, a place that sells hats in a fancy store in London. I'm probably getting that all wrong, but if you listen to the podcast that follows, you will hear exactly what I'm talking about. So we had a fantastic conversation. She was wonderful, great energy. I love talking to her. I think you're going to like this one too. This is my conversation with Charlotte Vassell. To meet you. So you must be a little bit of a night owl if you're willing to do this at 9:30 p.m. UK time.
Yeah, I actually do a lot of my writing between like 9 and 11 o'clock at night. I seem to just think quicker for some reason later on in the day, so I'm already awake.
I'm like exactly the opposite of you. I'm in bed by 9.
Well, fair enough. I mean, if it's the desire to keep writing and that kind of obsessional quality. Otherwise, I would also be in bed at 9 with a good book, just smothered up.
I would think though that for me at least, if I wrote and then went straight to bed, my brain would be hyperactive.
Oh, I'm the opposite. So I think I almost like wear myself out. Like if you have like a dog that runs around the room and then just collapses.
You have the writing zoomies.
Yeah. So I just go with the zoomies and then get to the point where I'm like, I don't want to finish this chapter. I need to go to bed. And then I just fall asleep. Whereas if I don't do that, I have to read to get myself to sleep. Otherwise, I'll just sit there watching videos. The next thing I know, it's midnight and I've got to get up in 6 hours.
Yeah, I'm the same way. It's funny how right, you can just be scrolling social media or YouTube, and that can last hours. And I go to read a book. This is going to sound terrible. I go to read a book, and in 15 minutes, I'm falling asleep. And it's not even that the book is, it's just, I guess it's more concentration, more strain on the eyes.
I sometimes think for me, it's almost like I'm using a lot of like mental power to imagine what's going on, particularly if it's quite active. And I'm thinking, you've got the world going in the back of your head. And that's rather than that, like something like TikTok where you just get the little mini dopamine hits all the time.
You don't have to really think.
Yeah, you don't even have to. You just go like, don't like, don't like, don't like.
Right. That's so funny. Well, listen, Charlotte, I opened up some email today and I saw an email from Mystery Writers of America. And lo and behold, I'm like, why do I know that name? I know that name. Oh, I'm talking to her today. Charlotte. Hey, congratulations. That's fantastic.
Thank you so much. It was
nominated for Best Novel.
Yeah, spectacular. I literally just sent it. I saw it on Instagram actually and sent it to my agent being like, oh my goodness, this is just incredible.
Yeah, now you got to make the trip over for the.
Oh well, hopefully we'll have to see.
No, but that's fantastic, and just so the listeners know, it's I believe it was nomination for Best Novel for The In Crowd. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's amazing, and I will tell you, I just went through being a judge for for a national or an international competition. That's a lot of work. So you need a lot of people to all agree. Yeah, the In Crowd is at least the top 5.
I mean, my mind is blown. It just sort of feels like something that happens to. I mean, actually being published in general feels like something that happens to other people.
Totally.
I just can't believe that it's happening to me. And then, just insane.
Yeah. Well, you're only 2 books in, so you have plenty of time to get jaded and cynical.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It won't take me long. Don't worry.
Yeah, but I know what you mean. Like if you at any point in your career look back at whether it's 2 books or 20 books and just think about the probabilities of being published for one book, traditionally published, it's fairly astronomical. So you can't really think about it because you'll go crazy.
I'm just happy to be here. I think that's the...
Yeah, I know,
it's
exactly.
It's a needle in a haystack situation, isn't it?
I know. I was nominated for an ITW Thriller Award, award, and I had no expectations. But I went to the banquet, and I was totally that happy to be here person. Yeah. Of course, you still want to win, and I didn't. But it didn't sting all that much because I'm like, I can't believe, like you, to your point, I can't believe I'm even published. I don't know what I'm doing. So how did my book get this far? Who bribed whom?
What favour got called in? Well, the nice thing is you had a lovely evening anyway.
You do.
Even if you didn't win, you're going to have a lovely evening. So a lovely evening's all in, I think. Except
for all the people that come up to you. Oh, I'm so sorry. You're like, no, you don't need to be reminded. So you're where in the UK are you?
I'm just outside of London.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Grew up in that area, or?
No, actually, I'm from the West Midlands, from a county called Worcestershire.
Okay.
Of the SOAS.
Of the SOAS
that no
variety.
one can pronounce. And it looks like The Hobbit. It's J.R.R. Tolkien's aunt had a farm just outside the town I grew up in, so it
Okay.
very much
So that was the inspiration.
looks like the Shire. So I grew up in a really small town and moved to London after I finished my undergrad, and I've sort of just inched slowly out because it's more affordable and the London house prices are insane.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's close enough to London that I can go and do all the fun things, but I don't have to deal with all the traffic.
Right. And good for you. So when you were growing up, were you the creative kid, or was writing in your consciousness at all?
Yeah, I'm from quite a bookish family.
Hmm.
I and one of my aunts was a librarian, so she was always, trying to get me to read things and putting different stuff in front of me, and sort of very much grew up with the library being my like happy place. Um, I I actually trained as an actor, and I thought that was probably more the route that I was going to go down. I went to drama school after university and sort of did the whole classical British training, Shakespeare and
Hmm.
Oscar Wilde kind of things. But I think it's more that if you have such a strong impulse to be a storyteller, and whether you're doing that through writing, or if you're a dancer, if you're an actor, a comedian, if you've just got that, I have to tell a story and I want you to enjoy it. If you have that drive for it, it will just come out, even if it's in different forms.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally
I've
agree.
always been like that since I was a child.
And it's funny, like I've interviewed a ton of authors, and everyone's got a different inception story,
Mm.
but it is all that idea of that it's going to come out of you one way or another, whether
Yeah,
you're 25 or 75.
yeah,
And I do kind of think so in your case, wanting to be an actor initially,
mm.
it is kind of that desire to storytell. And I think, I don't know, I'm a believer that the universe will eventually tell you which form that needs to
Yeah.
take.
You'll
Um,
just work it out once if something will just click,
right,
and you.
right. It takes you, the recipient of whatever the universe is trying to tell you,
Yeah,
to pay attention and to be
yeah,
curious. Uh,
yeah,
because you can force yourself, like, no matter what, come hell or high water, I'm going to be an actor. And maybe that's
yeah,
just not your thing, but you try to
yeah.
force it.
Exactly. I think one of my skills in life is being quite good at quitting. I'm a good quitter. I'm
Which
a
has its
brilliant quitter.
benefits.
Yeah, I'm good at sticking things out when I really need to and when I really, really want to, but actually I'm also quite good at quitting. Which I think is an underrated skill. Some can cost. People will just stick at things. I think
100%.
with acting in particular, because it's such a brutal profession and it's so personal, and you'll get rejected because they didn't quite like your voice, or you were a little bit too tall, or they went with someone with a different haircut, that kind of thing that is so personal that also just feels so like petty. You've essentially just being rejected for being you.
Right. Right.
And I think, I did 2 years out of drama school where I was acting full time, and particularly in London, because the rent is just so crazy, and sort of trying to juggle um, various part-time jobs. I think I worked out within 48 hours, I did 4 different part-time jobs at one point.
Wow.
And in order just to pay your rent, so you could have a shot at that audition that may or may not ever change your life.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and that's hard. That's so hard to live with. And I just thought I just don't want to be. I'm glad I gave it a shot, because I didn't want to be sat in my rocker at 80 telling my great grandkids and my grandkids I could have been an actor, but I just didn't. But at the same time, I'm glad I walked away.
Right. Well, I think, to your point, the act of quitting is a highly underrated
Usually.
process, and it's such a stupid cultural thing of, never quit, don't give up. And
Yeah.
it's about being self-aware. And I would venture to say, I would guess that you needed to go through that to get to
Mm.
where you are now.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's because of something that I'd always felt like I really wanted to do in my heart, that I felt like I just needed to give it a go. But what I will say is that going to drama school made me a much better writer.
Yeah.
I had like a practice novel that I wrote in 2014, and then went to drama school in 2015. And to be fair, the premise vaguely has legs in it, but I just got better. You can't sit down for 6 weeks in a rehearsal room Monday to Friday, 9 till 5, working on a Shakespeare play with amazing tutors who, have just got, between them, have got hundreds of years of experience, and sort of passing that on to you, and to not become a better writer.
Yeah.
My dialogue in particular got much better after drama school, because I read everything I write aloud to myself, because if it sounds clunky in my mouth, it's going to feel clunky in someone's ear. So so I genuinely think, you can't go and do Shakespeare and like Oscar Wilde and George Bernard Shaw and just these pillars of the English language, and to spend time like literally looking at them on a line level. You have half an hour looking at how you're saying one sentence in order to get the right land. It just honestly, it made me such a better actor. A better writer. It was a drama school, did make me a better actor.
and it's not like you're sitting there saying, how can I emulate this in the writing? But it all soaks into your consciousness, your subconsciousness. And you get, it's more about getting an ear for the efficacy of conversation in a way. That fine balance between what people really sound like and what reads well. Because you don't want to just verbatim, this is because it would like here, I'm stuttering, I'm stammering. You don't want to write that, but you don't want to make it sound so eloquent and formal or whatever that it has no character to it. And I can see how your experience as an actor probably really.
And if you think of someone like Oscar Wilde or that sort of Restoration era, they don't really get put on very much, even in the UK anymore. I saw a fantastic one at the National in 2015, because they've just got insanely huge casts and the costumes are bonkers, all the corsets and everything. So it's a lot. So you might see it at the National Theatre, but not generally. And you have those conversations that almost like rapier wit. So it's just boing, boing, boing. It's like a tennis match. And, and that's so enjoyable to see and listen to on stage. And particularly, audiobooks are phenomenal. The humans developed with an oral story tradition. So I'm always quite keen to try to listen for those points in my work and make sure they land.
Right. And the rapier wit is a great example because, you think of, maybe a US version of that, at least in terms of television, would be like an Aaron Sorkin, where everybody's having these rapid fire dialogues. They're all exceptionally clever. And when you really start to think about it, you're like, this conversation would never really happen. Like nobody's that quick, but it's subtle enough. And there's enough, and is well written enough that you pulls you in, and you give it the benefit of the doubt.
I think Sorkin's quite almost Shakespearean. So I think what his work does so well, and what Shakespeare does so well, is you obviously do have those super eloquent speeches that can say so much in so little, but really, really hit home. But then just combining it with the comedy, so you've got the shade of dark and light, and that's a really like tricky thing to get right in that sort of show, and he does it perfectly.
So all this while that you're seeking whatever your creative outlet is eventually defining for you, I assume you're working, making money, trying to like pay rent, especially because you moved just outside of London. What are you doing?
Well, I mean, I wrote The Other Half, which is the book before The In Crowd, which is the first in the D.I. Caius Beauchamp series. I wrote that on furlough in the pandemic because I always like saying, obviously, the pandemic was so traumatic and it was horrendous for so many other people. But in a perverse way, I'm always thankful for it because it gave me my room of my own. I was on full pay, and I didn't know how long it was going to last. So I just felt like I just had to bash out the novel that I'd had in my head for 5 years and that I didn't have the creative space to write. So I came up with the initial idea for The Other Half in 2015. And then I went to drama school. So that was 2 years. It was incredibly intense. had very little kind of creative breathing room. And then I sort of spent 2 years as a jobbing actor, going to auditions and sort of balancing everything. And then in 2019, I was like, I've had enough. I'm going to get a proper job, and I got a job in events. And then the pandemic happened 6 months later, and that having being furloughed and having that space to do it was I don't think my career might not exist if it hadn't have been for that moment.
Yeah. Maybe the pandemic came around just so you could write your book. Maybe that was the whole reason.
I don't think so.
It's a little selfish, but it worked.
I'm not sure about that. But I mean, in terms of random jobs, I mean, it's in my bio. But the single best job I have ever had was when I was training at drama school for 2 years. I worked in a gentleman's hatters in Jermyn Street, and I don't know if you've ever been to London, or if you're into very traditional menswear. Jermyn Street's where all the shirt makers are, and if you can name a man from the last 200 years who has a Wikipedia page and is British, they bought their shirts from Jermyn Street, essentially.
Wow.
It's you can go there now, and you can walk in and you can get measured, and the people who work there are all phenomenally highly trained professionals, and they'll just be able to measure you up for a shirt, and you can have one made bespoke, and it will fit you like an absolute glove. So I worked on Jermyn Street. I've worked on Jermyn Street a couple of times, but I worked in a gentleman's hatters called Bates. It's one of two of the only sort of two surviving gentleman's hatters really in that area. The other one's Lock and Co, which is in the Kingsman movie. I don't know if you've seen the first.
Yeah, Kingsman, of course. So, okay,
that's the hat. But I worked at their competitor Bates, and I loved it. I was selling like bowler hats and silk top hats for Ascot, and shooting caps, and trilbies and fedoras, and it was genuinely such a wonderful little job to have. We used to have to get the hats in the box off like sort of 10-foot tall cabinets, and we used to have to do it with these sticks that had been made in the Victorian era specifically to do that, and we were still using the same hat boxes because it still worked. I absolutely loved it. I've got a real respect for people who dedicate their lives to well-made clothes that last a lifetime. So menswear pops up quite a lot in both of my books, actually. And then the world of the other half, and Caius's world, he loves clothes, and it gets touched on quite a lot.
That's such a British thing, right? Like the idea of like, I'm going to go buy a hat. I mean, of course, in the US, it's like, I'm going to buy a dumb baseball cap.
Or a Stetson. I mean, Stetson's a great hat, like kind of American classic.
Yeah, true. But what kind of person is coming into that shop to buy a hat?
We had a lot of celebrities. Flat caps are quite popular as an alternative to a baseball cap that's slightly warmer. So we just have quite a lot of famous people. I've measured quite a few famous people's heads.
Did you keep a little side notebook that you had a list of it, like a serial killer? You have a list of all their head sizes.
All their head sizes. No, but I did get to the point where I could look at someone's head and tell you how big it was in centimeters just by looking at them.
But the exposure to, I mean, I can imagine just the time you spent there. Just the stories that were percolating in your mind, or just the character observations. And I know, with your books that is kind of that clientele that tends to be kind of part of your book. So you obviously were able to parlay that into your fiction.
Yeah, I'm a little bit nosy. And also just that bit of London is just lovely. Piccadilly can be a bit bonkers. It can be really busy and very touristy. And you've got the Royal Academy, art gallery on one side, and the other side of that you've got Fortnum and Mason's, which used to be the Queen's Grocers, and then you've got the largest bookshop in Europe just there, and Burlington Arcade, and they have their own police force, which has existed longer than the police force, and London invented the police in the modern sense, called Beadles, and you're not allowed to whistle when you walk through the arcade because that's how all the pickpockets used to communicate to each other, through whistling. And they've got one stood at either end, and they've got top hats on and capes, and walkie-talkies, and it just I just used to wander around there on my lunch break, just pop up to Savile Row and just have a look in the windows, just out of curiosity. And yeah, it was almost like living in some sort of fairy tale version of
Right. Pride and
London.
Prejudice.
Yeah. It's that bit of the world. It's kind of what they call clubland, St James's. You've got the Palace, Buckingham Palace is just on the other side. Clarence House is just there. You've got
Amazing.
Theatreland on the other side.
That's
And then you've
amazing.
got Hyde Park. Yeah, honestly, it's a great little part of London.
So the world shut down in 2020, so you could write your book, and you wrote it. And and then what? Did you know what to do with a completed manuscript?
I think I wrote it, and I very much wrote it quite quickly again because I didn't know how long I was going to have. And then I did an edit, and then I think I probably did another edit. I do have this kind of thing where I try to make myself read 20 books in between drafts, and I never managed 20 books, but it's almost like a palate cleanse. So and it's by books, it can be fiction, it can be non-fiction, it can be poetry, it can be plays, it's anything really. Just to see some good writing, and then it makes me more brutal with cutting bits of my own work out. So go, well, I just read a Booker winner, and it was phenomenal. How did you think that sentence was acceptable?
Right.
Cut it, get rid of it. So I think I kind of went through that process, and then in the July I started sort of sending it out to agents, and the other half has got quite a few references to classics in it, and the Greco-Roman world. So I went through all of the agents in the UK and worked out who had classics degrees or Latin or Greek, and sent it to them, and then none of them came back to me. So then I just sort of went on my acting kind of training here, and one of the things I got taught by my tutor was you keep a spreadsheet of your casting directors and your agents, so you can see if they keep getting you back in, whether you had a warm response from an agent or not, and you track it. And it was this beautiful, monstrous Excel spreadsheet that was color coded.
I love it.
And I just started working my way through them alphabetically after that. After none of my picks came in, and I got all the way down to R in March. So quite a few months, and that's when I met my agent. And I nearly didn't apply to my agency, so I'm with Rogers Collard and White, RCW, and they look after some absolutely stellar people. And I thought they're never going to take me. Never mind, should I even bother? Oh, sod it, why not? So I applied, and then had coffee with my wonderful agent John, and that was kind of that. But I almost didn't apply because I thought, what's the point? But rejection, just another rejection, never mind.
Right. But that's what it is, right? And I'm sure probably your acting training helped with that, like just being vulnerable, getting rejected, pursuing the craft and learning, being self-taught and just continuing, in
some ways it was easier. Because there's a sort of distance between you and a manuscript.
Right.
Like, I wrote that, but it isn't quite me. There's a bit of me in it, but it's not me. Whereas with acting, it was no, I don't like you.
They're not telling you in the book, we're not buying this because your hair is not the right color.
Yeah, exactly. Because we wanted a redhead for it instead. We wanted it shorter.
So how many do you remember? How many agent rejections you had before you got yours?
I was probably about 40 odd. Most of them didn't respond to me, and I had two very nice agents come back and say, "Oh, we really like your style, but I don't think I'm the right person for you. I'm sure you've already found someone." And then me just being there like, "No, I've not found someone."
Right.
But actually, the way I've come to feel about it is actually rejection's a good thing. I wouldn't want an agent who didn't believe in me and didn't believe in my work. They're not going to fight my corner. They're not going to keep at it. So good for me. You rejected me. Fantastic.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And the same is true of selling your manuscript, because even if you sell your manuscript, you can be with a publisher who is not in your corner, but is not focused on you. Which is, we see the industry today and everybody's stretched thin, and you might be with a huge publisher, but if you're very, very small, you're not going to get you just want to have an editor who is passionate as your agent is about your manuscript. But sometimes what that means, which is incredibly hard to do, is to turn down an offer because you have a sense that, which, I mean, most people wouldn't do that. I've turned down one publisher once, and it was the hardest decision probably I've ever had to make because, we turned them down and we kept shopping and we kept getting rejected. But it was a sense of like, it needs to be, if it's going to be with a home, it needs to be with the right home.
The right home. I doubt you regret that decision.
No, I don't regret it at all. It ended up landing me with Source Books, who I didn't even know who they were at the time. And now they're huge. And I've had my last 6 books with them. But it took turning down an offer from another publisher. Granted, that offer wasn't this massive offer or anything. But it was a really good company who I had 2 books with. So it's, you have to take chances. And if it doesn't work out in your favor, I always think, it's just because it hasn't happened yet. People look at rejection. I think about my first 3 books didn't sell, and you kind of mentioned you had a practice novel, and people say they're always amazed by the fact that you don't go back and rework those novels. And you're like, it's not, I didn't waste my time. This is how I learned.
Yeah. They're your training wheels. It's your training wheels.
You need it. And I don't think people appreciate that enough, including writers. They get so focused on, this is my manuscript and I've been working on it for 8 years and it's all I know. And they don't let it go because they think it's otherwise 8 years were wasted. I'm like, you're ridiculous. You learned so much in those 8 years. Now apply it to your next story.
Yeah. And I think the thing that I tried to do when I was subbing was I just started trying to write something else. So I think I've got another novel somewhere in a drawer. It's probably not very good, that I wrote after the other half. Just because I just wanted to say, well, I'm actually working on a romance right now. Would you prefer a romance instead?
Oh, that's interesting. So you're keeping your options open.
You know what? I really like genre writing, and I think the interesting thing with crime and romance for that is that because there's a certain amount of scaffolding that sort of has to happen in order for the plot to move, and they're both plot-driven genres. You can have a lot of fun, like a huge amount of fun with all the other stuff around it. So you can pin things on that you find interesting, and you can come up with a work that's sort of like quietly revolutionary in a way,
right?
Because you're moving along with the conventions of the genre,
right?
So you're just sort of building on something rather than reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, I think you're right. Although I think that scaffolding is fairly loosely constructed. I think there's a lot of, it depends on what you're writing. So I think about like a traditional mystery, and I think, yes, there is an infrastructure there. There probably needs to be a dead body on page 1, and we need to figure out who the perpetrator is by the last page. Yeah. But for thriller writing, and you get labeled a thriller writer, you could be labeled a suspense writer, or a mystery writer, crime writer. I think it's more, the pacing needs to be there more than anything else. And I think story-wise, you can kind of take a lot of liberties. As long as you're writing, I think, what you want to write, you're like, this is the story I want to tell.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you're not interested in it, why should someone else be?
Yeah. And you lose all context for it. I think when you're writing a book, you lose context anyway. I write a first draft, and then, I haven't even really gone back and looked at it much, and I don't outline. So it's a fucking mess. But then when you're going back and reading it, you do get like, oh, this part's kind of interesting. And then this part's kind of, I feel like I'm skimming this. So, why is that? Because it's not good. So you have to really listen to yourself.
Yeah. Cutting things out that are crap is the best feeling.
It's the best. It's
quite liberating to be like, no, that is not actually good enough for this book. It needs to go.
Totally. And I think what I find in my own writing is the repetition. Like I have forgotten that I've explained something, and then, you'll see it 3 times or 4 times throughout the manuscript. And so you have to catch those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Or just if you're trying to emphasize a point and when you go back and read it, like, oh, we get it. They just need to be told once.
One thing I do, because I'm somewhere between like a planner and a pantser, but I'm just not very good at planning. And
I'm not either.
I have to kind of like improv it. I just have to go, well, we'll find something, it'll be fine. I'll land on something. Is that what I will sometimes do is I'll leave myself options in a novel that if I can always loop back round to later, and they end up being the red herrings.
Right.
Because I genuinely thought or maybe I could use that at another point. And I've with both the other half and the in crowd, I didn't know who the killer was.
Yeah.
And
I think that's great.
The other half. Yeah. Well, it makes it organic, right?
100%.
So I get to around like 60-70% and I go, oh, bugger, who did it? And then I'll just have to stop and read it all over again. And now I realize I've actually worked it into the novel already.
Right. Or you go back and layer in a couple small things.
Yeah. And just a couple of little tweaks here and then you go, oh, okay, cool. But I hadn't realized I'd worked out the killer. I knew who, somewhere in my subconscious, I knew who the killer in the other half was.
I mean, that's
way earlier than I actually consciously did.
You're so correct. I mean, that's what it is. And that's what I teach my students is trust your subconsciousness. But the problem is it requires a confidence to do that. And that's a very hard thing for a writer to have. Confidence is like what lacks.
I feel like, I've stood on stage and done Shakespearean monologues. I could do anything at this point. I'm just like, never mind.
Yeah, and that's so great because that is the one thing I think most writers lack is that ability to, because you even just referenced it a couple minutes ago. You said, I don't know who the killer is, but I'll figure it out. Having that confidence to be like, yeah, I'll figure it out is so important for a writer to have because it liberates them. Because if I try to outline and I think about plot points, they're just too obvious. And so whenever I'm writing, even if a twist organically comes to me, I think, is this too obvious? And if it's not too obvious, is it too much of a stretch? Is it too much of, God in the machine? It has to still be believable. But that's the joy of it, is just having twists that are just occur to you out of nowhere, but it was there the whole time. It just took you having to get to that 60% for it to come out.
I kind of believe in, when I was at drama school, we kind of used to call it playing. And like when you're messing around and you're working things out, you're playing. And obviously actors used to be called players back in the day. And it's, I really feel like the thing I really got from drama school was kind of like a bit of a loosening up and like a freedom of expression. And also the concept we had, the head of acting used to talk about failing gloriously.
I love that.
Yeah, so you can fail, but if you're going to fail gloriously. Fail trying really hard at something that is out of your comfort zone and you've pushed yourself. Right. So yeah, and I will always go too big as well. That's something else I got taught at drama school. Go big. Because it's easier to rein a performance in and make it smaller than it is to take a small performance and make it bigger.
That makes sense.
So go as big as you can and then cut it down. But I mean that works for me. But I think my work is a little bit camp in places. So that very kind of like British sense of campness. So I think that kind of cheeky playfulness,
right?
That I kind of instinctively just write. And I don't think I could write anything that wasn't like that. Right,
well, it's your voice.
Cynical and yeah, exactly. I think that's just me, and that's how I write. I don't think I could be completely po-faced and very, very serious.
So, last question before we get to the storytelling bit. You, at the top of the show, you kind of said you're very good at quitting things. Now, with these novels behind you, and I'm sure novels in the works, do you ever have a different sense about writing? Do you look at writing like, well, I'm just going to do this for the rest of my life, whether it sells or not?
Absolutely. I mean, I did an event last night and I can't imagine doing anything else. Like, I literally get to make things up for fun, for a living. And that is just Oh my goodness, I couldn't think of anything better. I'm also just, I'm just terrible in offices. I just don't work. I'm not good. You don't want me on your team. You don't want me on your call. I won't organise that. Will I come to that meeting? Who knows if I remember it?
Yeah.
But I can write a novel, so I'm
Right.
trying to stick with
But
it.
you couldn't do anything else, so you might as well be a
Can't
writer.
do anything else. Yeah, can't do anything else. And actually, that was again, I got this a really good piece of advice from an older actor in my agency, and he said, only stick with acting if you genuinely think you couldn't do anything else. And I was like, I think I could. And I think I could be a
Yeah, or want
writer.
to do anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Same diff, really, isn't it? Same difference.
I mean, that's great advice for writers too, because when I coach students, we spend the first hour or couple hours talking about why are they writing, because I'm very interested in the psychology of writing, and everyone has an answer, but when you really have to dig in and say, really explore this why, because it's a tough profession. If you can even get to the point of making it a profession.
Yeah.
And I realized one day my why is like, I just can't picture myself not doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Can't do anything else.
that's a great answer. But it's just, you have to feel that you can't just be on like the idea of being a writer.
Yeah.
That's you get that benefit as well, but it can't be the right answer.
I think the idea of being a writer is almost like an aesthetic choice. Do you remember seeing on social media the other year, and sort of, someone had done a museum spread, a magazine spread, and it was like the writer, and it was just people in trench coats, and I was just sat there thinking, I'm sat here at my desk with leggings that have got a hole in.
Right.
My head's just like on the top of my head. No makeup. I'm like, yeah, no, this would not make it to editorial level.
Right. Most writers are pretty slovenly, I think. I'm in a sweatshirt today because it's 10 degrees outside. Well, listen, Charlotte, we're going to wrap up soon, but before we do, we're going to do the making it up part of the show, where I've selected a couple books at random from my bookshelf. Ooh. We are going to choose a random page and a random sentence. I'm going to read that sentence, and this is all your improv training as an actor is going to come out. That'll be
I'd still be doing it.
That'll be the first sentence in like maybe a 2-minute long short story. So I'm going to read the sentence. You give me the next 1 or 2 sentences. I'll do a couple sentences, and then we'll call it a day.
Apologies in advance.
I know. Well, it's always a mess. So actually, I have a fellow nominee of yours, except in a different category. The Mechanics of Memory by Audrey Lee. She got this is nominated for Best First Novel by an American, I believe. And then Richard Adams' Watership Down. So a classic.
Let's traumatize ourselves all over again.
It is pretty traumatizing, isn't it?
They made it into a TV series in the UK, and it's one of those, like, everyone saw it as a kid and everyone is like, rabbit.
Right. So choose one of those two.
Let's go Watership Down.
Okay, so give me a page between 1 and 450.
113.
Okay, and we could do whatever we want with this. This doesn't have to be about rabbits. So speaking of traumatizing, so I'm just going to read this sentence. It's a piece of dialogue. The character's name, in which we know the character is a rabbit, but the character's name is Blackberry. I think he's gone, said Blackberry. I can't feel his breathing. They don't have to be rabbits.
They don't have to be rabbits in it, okay. Oh. What do we do with the body? Do you think we could get away with putting it in the compost heap?
I looked at Blackberry and regretted that I asked him to come along to this. He clearly didn't know what he was doing. No, I told him, there are 7 specific stages to getting rid of a body. We can't just throw them in the compost pile.
What about a pig? I saw a thing on the internet where it said you could just feed anything to a pig and it would disappear. Are there any pigs nearby?
my frustration grew. You know that pigs have bowel movements too, right? And you know that becomes evidence, right? The very first thing we have to do is get rid of the fingerprints, which means getting rid of the fingers, which usually means getting rid of the hands.
How are you going to do that? I saw another thing where apparently people who pick pineapples don't have fingerprints because the acid or like the enzyme in it burns them away. Have you got a pineapple?
I reached into my back pocket and I unfolded my 4-inch long hunting knife. It clicked satisfyingly into place. The intention was to get to work on the fingers. But as I looked at Blackberry, I was wondering how much of a liability this had become.
Blackberry looked at the knife and thought, oh, bugger, I've not done the washing up. I have to do that when I get home.
I think we call it there.
Call it there, don't be sorry. Two characters in completely different books, aren't they?
That's fun, right? Yeah, that is real acting improv right there.
Yes.
And it usually turns very dark and very violent almost immediately, even if you're reading about rabbits.
Even Watership Down is a very dark book.
It is. It is. Well, Charlotte, what a pleasure to meet you, to talk to you, and my deep congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you so much.
So I will.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, I will be at BoucherCon in whenever it is in September in New Orleans. So I will be fingers crossed that they'll be reading your name.
Oh well, yeah.
Enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks again. All right, that is it. That is my conversation with the talented Charlotte Vassell. That was fun. I had a good time talking to her. Please go check out her latest book. And her latest book is The In Crowd. The one prior to that was The Other Half, both in a series. And you can check her out at charlottevassell.co.uk. And then hop on over to carterwilson.com where you can sign up for my newsletter, buy my latest book, tell me what you did, check out my event dates and where I'm going to be traveling to. And then if you're a writer who is looking for that extra help getting motivated, working on craft, you can go to unboundwriter.com and see the services that I offer there. All right, that is it. Thank you so much, as always, for watching and or listening. Another episode of Making It Out will be out just next week. In the meantime, as always, stay safe, take care.